The stillness of a winter morning hangs over the Iowa plains like a promise of what is to come. In the farmhouse kitchen, the warmth of wood and the smell of coffee greet the day before dawn. Outside, frost glistens on bare corn stubble, and the first pale light of another day sits low on the horizon. The story you are about to experience is not about a hero who seeks accolades or a mythical warrior who conquers dragons. It is about men who do not complain. It is about farmers who carry burdens quietly and steadily, building their lives with hands weathered by decades of honest work. If you have ever wondered what strength looks like when words are scarce and actions speak louder than any shout, then this story will resonate. This is not just a tale of hardship and endurance. It is a meditation on what it means to live with integrity. To farm is to trust that the earth will respond to your labor. To farm for 50 years is to weave yourself into the land so tightly that the boundaries between man and soil blur. From which city are you watching this story today? If you enjoy content about courage, resilience, and the values that sustain communities across generations, consider subscribing. The main character in this narrative is Earl Mitchell, a 68-year-old farmer from Iowa. He has spent half a century working on the same land that his father once bought with sweat and sacrifice. There are no headlines about Earl. There are no statues or commemorative plaques to tell visitors about his achievements. Yet his story is the essence of what built this nation. In the early morning, he rises without fanfare. He pulls on denim worn soft by time and boots caked with evidence of seasons past. He sits in the kitchen with a steaming mug and the dark wood table that his father built when the farm had no power. He reads the weather forecast, not because he hopes to find good news, but because he must plan the day. Earl is part of a generation that believed in working until the job was done, not until it became uncomfortable. When he started farming at 18, the world was different. There were no smartphones to tell him the markets. Radio broadcasts crackled through static. He learned to interpret cloud formations better than the barometer. He learned that complaining did not plant a seed or mend a fence. It was as if his father's quiet dignity had carved a path he could follow. The land itself became his teacher. Each row of corn taught patience. Each calf that survived a rough winter taught humility. Over decades, the rhythms of planting and harvest became part of his heartbeat. When his friends from school left the county to seek comfort in city jobs, he stayed. He married his high school sweetheart in the church down the road. Together, they raised children who learned to walk between rows of beans. They built a life measured in bushels and bales rather than paychecks. Dawn on Earl's farm is not a moment. It is a slow unfolding of light and sound. The rooster begins first, then the cattle low softly waiting for their hay. He pulls on his coat and steps into the crisp air. Each breath forms a cloud. Frost crunches under his boots. He walks to the barn where he keeps the tractor that has served him faithfully since he bought it, used in the early 70s. It is not fancy. It has no climate control or navigation system. When he turns the key and the engine coughs to life, he feels a sense of gratitude. This machine has tilled soil through droughts and floods. It has pulled wagons heavy with grain and brought in hay bales during storms when snow drifted high as the fence posts. As the sun breaks over the horizon, he drives out into the fields. The land stretches like a patchwork quilt of brown and gold. Even now in winter, he sees the potential of the coming spring. He runs his hand through the soil, taking a handful of earth and letting it crumble between his fingers. The ground is cold, but he knows that beneath the surface, organisms are at work. They break down last year's residue, preparing nourishment for new roots. Farming has taught him that the most important work often happens unseen. So too with men like Earl. Their steady presence sustains communities. They help neighbors repair roofs after storms. They show up at funerals with casseroles. They plow out driveways after blizzards. They celebrate births and mourn losses, all without making a show of their efforts. They simply do what needs to be done, The morning chores take hours, feeding cattle, checking fences, splitting wood for the stove in his home. By mid-morning, the sun has climbed higher and the frost has melted. He heads back toward the barn, satisfied that he has done his part to prepare for the day. Farming is not only about peaceful mornings. It is about surviving storms that would break those unaccustomed to their severity. In the late 70s, Earl watched a line of black clouds form on the horizon. He had seen storms before, but this one was different. The temperature dropped sharply and the wind rose with a howl. He ran to the barn to secure equipment and animals. Moments later, hail began to pelt the metal roof like a barrage of rocks. Within minutes, hailstones the size of golf balls covered the ground, shredding leaves and smashing windows. When the storm passed, the corn stood flattened. In that moment, he felt a weight in his chest. Months of labor had been destroyed in 20 minutes. He could have shouted or cursed the sky. He could have sat down in the mud and given up. Instead, he wiped the rain from his face and began assessing what he could salvage. He walked row by row, picking up what remained of his crop. He called a neighbor whose barn roof had collapsed under the weight of hail. Together, they patched holes and shared equipment. In the weeks that followed, he replanted some fields. In others, he planted cover crops to protect the soil. The bank offered a loan, and he accepted it with the knowledge that he would be paying for that storm for years. The early 80s brought the farm crisis. Interest rates skyrocketed. Land values plummeted. Farmers across the Midwest faced foreclosure. Earl remembers sitting at the kitchen table going over numbers with his wife. They whispered so the children would not hear their worry. They cut back on expenses. They repaired equipment themselves instead of hiring mechanics. They postponed buying a new pickup truck. There were nights when he lay awake listening to the wind outside and wondering if they would lose everything his father had built. He visited neighbors who had to sell their farms and watched men cry quietly as they loaded their families into moving trucks. Through it all, he did not complain. Not because he did not feel fear or frustration, but because he believed his energy needed to be used for action rather than lamentation. He dug deeper into his reserves of resilience. He took jobs hauling grain for larger operations. He picked up part-time work at a nearby elevator. He made it through that crisis by sheer determination, paying off the loan and keeping the farm intact. The mental toll of farming is often hidden behind stoic expressions and calloused hands. In recent years, the conversation about rural mental health has become more urgent. Reports indicate that farmers are several times more likely to die by suicide than the general population. Isolation, volatile markets, unpredictable weather, and the pressure to maintain multi-generational farms create intense stress. Earl is part of a culture that has long equated toughness with silence. For decades, he did not have the language to describe the weight he carried. When his father died suddenly of a heart attack during harvest season, he returned to the fields the next day. He had acres of corn to bring in before rain made it impossible. He did not cry until weeks later when he found his father's old jacket hanging on a nail in the shed. He folded the jacket carefully and placed it in a drawer. He could have reached out to someone, but he did not want to burden his family. Instead, he took solace in routine. He fed animals and mended fences, because those tasks required focus and purpose. In the late 90s, when commodity prices crashed again, he felt despair creeping into his bones. There were nights when he sat on the porch looking out across the fields and felt the emptiness that frightened him. He did not tell anyone. He believed that if he just worked harder, the feeling would pass. It eventually did, but it left him with an awareness that many farmers suffer in silence. He began volunteering at the local co-op and listening to younger farmers who expressed frustration and worry. He did not pretend to have all the answers, but he offered his presence. He shared stories of past hardships and reminded them that the land had a way of teaching patience. In recent years, telephone hotlines and online support groups for farmers have emerged. Earl has told his neighbor, a younger man struggling to keep his operation afloat, that talking about stress does not make one weak. When he hears about farmers in other communities taking their lives, he feels a heaviness. He understands the sense of being trapped between tradition and financial reality. When he prays at night, he asks for strength for those who cannot see a way forward. The stigma around mental health in rural areas is slowly changing, but it remains a challenging topic. Many men still equate asking for help with failure. Part of Earl's quiet mission is to model a different kind of resilience, one that acknowledges hardship without letting it define the person. Generational responsibility rests on the shoulders of men, like Earl. His father bought the land with money earned through back-breaking labor in factories and fields. He walked away from secure employment to pursue a dream of owning his own farm. He saved every spare dollar, mended his own clothes, and poured his sweat into the soil. When he handed the deed over to Earl, he did not do so with fanfare. He simply said that the farm was now his responsibility. Earl felt the weight of that moment more than any ceremony could convey. For 5 decades, he has been a caretaker, not only of property, but of a legacy. Every decision he makes, from crop rotation to conservation practices, is filtered through a sense of duty to his ancestors and to future generations. He installed terraces to prevent erosion. He switched to no-till farming to protect soil structure. He enrolled part of his land in conservation programs that pay less than row cropping but preserve wildlife habitat. He did not have to do these things. Nobody would have criticized him for squeezing every last dollar from the land. But he views himself as a steward rather than an owner. This mindset extends beyond his farm. When a neighbor's barn burned down one summer, he showed up with lumber and nails. He helped rebuild with a team of men who did not need to be asked. When a young couple moved to the community to start a small farm, he shared his experience. He told them about the year of the hailstorm and the years of drought, not to discourage them, but to remind them that farming requires a long view. He believes that men who do not complain do not do so because they are devoid of feeling. They simply prioritize action over self-pity. They understand that complaining does not fix a broken machine or comfort a grieving neighbor. Instead, they channel their energy into building and repairing, into hugging and listening, into showing up day after day. The concept of not complaining is not about suppressing emotion. It is about resilience. Earl's father taught him that the earth does not respond to anger or tears. It responds to seeds and sweat. But the same father also taught him to attend to the needs of his soul. In their small church down the gravel road, Earl learned about faith. Faith, he believes, is not a guarantee that crops will always be abundant or that storms will spare his barn. It is a confidence that he can face whatever comes. During drought years, he prayed for rain. During flood years, he prayed for strength to salvage what he could. When his children left for college and decided not to return to the farm, he prayed for the wisdom to let go of his expectation that the land would remain in the family. That decision hurt. He had imagined passing the deed to his son or daughter just as his father had passed it to him. When his children explained that they had different dreams, he smiled and supported them. He did not want them to feel trapped by tradition. He realized that part of being a man who does not complain is also being a man who does not impose his burdens on others. Instead, he found a young farmer in the community who was eager to lease part of the land and eventually buy it. Earl mentored him, teaching him soil health principles, market strategies, and the value of showing up for neighbors. Through this process, he discovered that legacy is not always about bloodlines. It is about values. If those values are carried forward by someone who shares the same dedication, then the spirit of the farm lives on. This perspective freed him from bitterness. He continued to work the land he loved, knowing that when the time came to hand over the reins, he would do so willingly. There is poetry in the seasons of a farm. Spring is a burst of hope as seeds are pressed into moist soil, and the fields transform from brown to a delicate green. Summer is a time of labor, when long days are spent in tractors or hay barns. Autumn arrives with the golden rustle of dry corn leaves and the hum of combines moving across the land. Winter brings rest and reflection, a time when the earth sleeps and farmers mend equipment and plan for the coming year. Earl knows these rhythms intimately. He has experienced springs where seeds washed away in floods and springs where the soil was so dry that seeds lay dormant for weeks. He remembers summers when the heat was relentless and the rain scarce. He recalls autumns where grain bins overflowed and others where they remained half empty. Through all of this, he has learned that control is an illusion. He can prepare and adapt, but he cannot dictate weather or market prices. What he can control is his response. Men who do not complain are not apathetic. They are deliberate. They recognize that complaining drains energy that could be used to find solutions or to help others. During one particularly harsh winter, heavy snow collapsed the roof of a neighboring barn. The farmer called Earl in distress. Without hesitation, Earl gathered tools and drove through snowdrifts to help. For hours they shoveled, braced beams, and salvaged equipment. They did not sit around lamenting the misfortune. They acted. In doing so, they found camaraderie and purpose. When Earl returned home that evening, his muscles ached and his cheeks stung from cold. He sat by the stove and felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had been part of something larger than himself. He believes that this spirit of mutual aid is the foundation of rural life. It counters isolation and reminds farmers that they are not alone in their struggles. The knowledge that others have your back makes the hard times bearable. The modern world presents new challenges that Earl's father could never have imagined. Climate change has altered precipitation patterns, bringing more intense storms and unpredictable droughts. Global markets fluctuate based on decisions made continents away. Trade disputes and tariffs can decimate commodity prices overnight. Technology has both eased and complicated farming. Satellites provide precise data on soil moisture and crop growth, but they also require investment and training. Earl has adopted some new tools. He uses yield monitors and moisture sensors. He has learned to read market trends on his computer, yet he remains grounded in the fundamentals. He knows how to read the sky and how to walk his fields to spot pests. He believes that adaptability is part of resilience. Men who do not complain do not romanticize the past. They honor tradition while embracing necessary change. They invest in soil health because they understand that long-term sustainability matters more than short-term gains. They advocate for rural broadband so that children can access education and farmers can connect to markets. They support mental health resources because they have seen too many neighbors suffer in silence. Earl also recognizes that the younger generation brings skills that complement his experience. He mentors a young woman who returned to the county with a degree in agronomy. She introduces him to cover crops he has never considered. He teaches her how to fix a biler with nothing more than baling wire and ingenuity. Together they build a partnership that bridges generations. This cooperation is essential in a time when rural communities are shrinking and the average age of farmers continues to rise. Without new voices and new ideas, the traditions that built these communities will fade. Men like Earl serve as bridges between past and future, ensuring that the values of resilience and integrity are not lost in the rush of progress. As this story draws to a close, it is important to reflect on what men like Earl Mitchell represent. They are not relics of a bygone era. They are living examples of perseverance, humility, and the unbreakable connection between humans and the land. Their refusal to complain is not a denial of pain. It is a disciplined choice to focus on solutions, to channel energy into work and community rather than into resentment. The quiet heroes of rural America rarely receive recognition. They do not seek it. They measure success not in applause but in the health of their soil, the strength of their barns, and the well-being of their neighbors. They understand that every seed planted is an act of hope. They know that every storm survived is a testament to their resilience. They see each sunrise as another chance to do what needs to be done. If you have followed this narrative to this point, you have walked through decades of one man's life and glimpsed the broader context of farming in America. You have seen the sacrifices made to keep a farm afloat during crises. You have felt the tension between tradition and change. You have witnessed the quiet strength that comes from doing meaningful work. If this resonates with you, please share your own experiences with courage or perseverance in the comments below. Your voice matters. Together, we can build a community that honors the values of hard work and integrity. Subscribe to The Last Farmer for more stories that celebrate the men and women who feed the nation and keep the heartland alive. In order to understand what it means to be a man who does not complain, it helps to walk through the seasons beyond the few hours we have glimpsed. Summer on Earl's farm is an immersion into a world where time is measured by chores completed and light that seems endless. The sun rises early and sets late, stretching days into long arcs of heat and work. Earl usually begins before the sun lifts over the soybean fields. He climbs into the tractor with a thermos of water and a sandwich prepared by his own hands. The cab is warm even before the day begins. He checks the oil and fuel, runs through a mental checklist of maintenance tasks done the night before, and heads out to the cornfield. The smell of turned earth and growing plants fills the air. In late June and early July, corn grows quickly, each day bringing noticeable change. There is a saying that corn should be knee-high by the 4th of July, but with modern hybrids and proper weather, it is often shoulder-high by that date. Earl walks rows of green, pulling weeds by hand in patches where the cultivator cannot reach. He checks for signs of pest pressure, like the orange eggs of corn rootworms on the underside of leaves, or the damage caused by cutworms near the base of stalks. When he finds an infestation, he plans an intervention using integrated pest management. He does not dump chemicals indiscriminately. He calls the extension office for advice, checks weather forecasts to ensure sprays will not wash away, and aims to minimize harm to beneficial insects. This careful approach is part of how he honors the land. Afternoons in July often bring thunderstorms. Dark clouds build on the horizon while the air grows heavy. Earl watches the sky with an experienced eye. He sees the way the wind shifts and feels the drop in temperature that signals a storm. If there is hay cut and lying in the field, he rushes to bale it before rain ruins it. Sometimes he drives the tractor across the field at a faster pace than he would like, watching lightning in the distance. He feels adrenaline, not fear, because he knows each decision can mean the difference between saving feed for his cattle or losing it to mold. When storms hit, they can bring welcome rain or destructive hail. Earl has seen both. He has stood at the barn door watching sheets of water pour from the sky, grateful for the moisture that will fill ponds and swell kernels. He has also watched hailstones shred leaves and beat young plants into tatters. During such moments, he breathes slowly and reminds himself that lamenting will not change the outcome. He focuses on what can be done afterward. Summer evenings on the farm are a study in contrasts. After a day of intense heat and labor, the sun sinks low, painting the sky in streaks of pink and orange. The fields hum with insects. Earl steps out onto his porch with a glass of iced tea. He watches fireflies blink over the yard, each tiny light a reminder of beauty. He takes a deep breath and allows himself to feel proud of the work he has accomplished. He recalls summers from his childhood when he and his siblings would chase those same fireflies and see who could catch the most. Back then, his father would sit in a worn wooden chair, smoking a pipe and looking out across the fields. He rarely spoke of his worries. If a storm had ruined crops or a piece of equipment had broken, the children knew only that he seemed quieter. As an adult, Earl appreciates the strength it took for his father to shield the family from the weight of such burdens. He understands that his father's silence was not indifference, but an expression of love and resilience. The cycle of work continues through the season. One day he mows pasture, carefully avoiding ground-nesting birds. Another day he repairs irrigation equipment. He hauls water to a far field when drought stretches on and ponds recede. He checks fences daily because cattle that break through can cause accidents on rural roads. He moves cattle from one pasture to another to allow forage to regrow. In the evenings he keeps records. He writes down rainfall amounts, cattle weights, feed rations. He reviews market prices for corn and soybeans, which rise and fall with news from trade talks and weather reports from Brazil and Argentina. He purchases fuel when prices dip and sells a portion of his crop when markets spike. These decisions require a calm mind. He cannot be rattled by every market fluctuation. He has learned over decades that patience often yields better results than reacting impulsively to every headline. Summer also brings community events that lighten the workload's weight. Earl helps organize the county fair every year. He sets up livestock pens, strings lights in the exhibition hall, and makes sure the ring is ready for young people to show their animals. He stands by the ring as children lead pigs in stirs, their faces determined and nervous. He remembers his own children and grandchildren, doing the same. The fair is more than a competition. It is a celebration of rural life. There are pies to taste, quilts to admire, tractors polished to a shine for the parade. People from different backgrounds come together, sharing stories and laughter. The fair reminds Earl that he is part of a larger tapestry. It offers a break from the routine and an opportunity to encourage younger generations. When he hands a blue ribbon to a child who has worked all summer to raise an animal, he sees the spark of pride in their eyes. He knows that these experiences will shape them, just as they shaped him. At night, after the fairgrounds lights have been turned off, he returns home exhausted but content. The road home is lit by stars and the pale glow of his truck headlights. He turns into the driveway and feels the satisfaction of a day filled with purpose. He thinks about the young man he was at 20, the older man he is now, and the journey between. He smiles at the thought that although much has changed, the technology, the markets, the climate, the core values remain. Work hard. Help your neighbors. Find beauty in simple things. Keep going even when the path seems steep. These are the lessons of summer that sustain men like Earl through other seasons. To fully appreciate the resilience of farmers who do not complain, one must revisit the farm crisis of the 1980s in detail. This period, sometimes called the Agricultural Depression, reshaped rural communities across the Midwest and left scars that remain to this day. Earl had been farming for about 10 years when the crisis began. In the late 1970s, interest rates climbed as the Federal Reserve tried to combat inflation. Farmers who had borrowed money to buy land or equipment suddenly faced interest rates that reached double digits. At the same time, grain prices fell due to global competition and policy decisions. The value of farmland, which had been rising steadily, began to collapse. Banks foreclosed on farms with little warning. Auctions of land and equipment became common sights on gravel roads. Families who had farmed for generations were forced to leave their homes. Earl remembers the tension of those years vividly. He attended auctions to support neighbors, not to buy equipment. He would stand with dozens of other farmers as an auctioneer's chant echoed across the yard. Each item sold represented a piece of someone's life. He watched grown men who had spent their entire lives building their farms walk away with only a fraction of the value they had invested. He listened to the quiet whispers of farmers, wondering if they would be next. In the evenings, he sat with his wife at the kitchen table with piles of bills and loan statements. They ran numbers over and over, trying to find ways to reduce expenses. They sold a second vehicle and delayed replacing the roof on their farmhouse even though it leaked. They cut back on meat consumption, eating more beans and vegetables from their garden. They bartered with neighbors, trading labor for equipment use. There was little cash, but there was an abundance of determination. Government policies at the time offered limited relief. In 1985, Congress passed the Farm Credit Act to provide emergency assistance, but the damage had been done. Earl recalls going to meetings where farmers discussed forming advocacy groups. They wrote letters to their representatives. They drove tractors to state capitals. They hoped their voices would be heard. Through these efforts, some programs were established, such as interest rate restructuring and debt relief. However, many farmers still faced foreclosure. The crisis was not just financial, it was psychological. Men who had grown up believing that hard work guaranteed success now faced failure through no fault of their own. The sense of identity tied to farming was shaken. Depression, anxiety, and suicide rates rose. Earl supported a friend who considered selling everything and moving away. They spent hours talking over coffee, both men struggling to articulate feelings that did not fit their self-image. They did not use the word depression. They said they were tired, worried, overwhelmed. It was in these conversations that Earl realized that men needed safe spaces to share their burdens without fear of being judged as weak. Despite these challenges, some farmers survived. Those who did often had diversified operations, manageable debt, and supportive communities. Earl credits his survival to a combination of frugality, innovation, and luck. He diversified into cattle to supplement crop income. He planted alfalfa to sell hay to dairy farmers. He took on custom planting and harvesting for neighbors. He and his wife budgeted carefully, tracking every penny. They also benefited from a local cooperative that offered lower interest rates and flexible repayment options. But perhaps the most important factor was community. Neighbors pooled resources. When one farmer needed labor to harvest a field quickly, half a dozen tractors would arrive. When a family could not make a mortgage payment, others chipped in. These acts of solidarity did not show up in the news, but they kept farms afloat as the crisis eased in the early 1990s. Those who survived emerged changed. Many were more cautious with borrowing. They diversified their operations. They became advocates for mental health resources. Earl became involved with the county extension office, sharing his story with younger farmers. He told them about the auction where he watched a friend's tractor sell for less than half its value. He told them about the nights he lay awake listening to the wind and wondering if he would hear a knock on the door from a banker. He told them about the relief of making the final payment on a high-interest loan. These stories were not to scare them, but to instill prudence. He emphasized saving during good years to buffer against bad ones. He encouraged them to develop relationships with lenders and to diversify income streams. Through these conversations, he found healing. Sharing his pain allowed him to process it. Hearing others' experiences reminded him he was not alone. The farm crisis also prompted policy changes. Land-grant universities expanded their research on agricultural economics. Extension offices developed programs for financial planning and stress management. Legislators introduced provisions to stabilize farm income and support conservation. Faith communities offered counseling and hosted support groups. Over time, the immediate memory of the crisis faded, but its lessons remained. Earl keeps a clipping from a newspaper article about a neighbor's auction pinned to a bulletin board in his workshop. It is yellowed and brittle, but it serves as a reminder of how quickly fortunes can change. It motivates him to stay humble during good years and to plan for the future. It also fuels his commitment to helping others. He knows that sharing resources and knowledge can mean the difference between survival and loss for a young farmer just starting out. Earl's father deserves his own chapter in this story. Born in the early 1920s, he grew up during the Great Depression. As a boy, he watched his parents struggle to feed their family, mend clothes, and keep a roof over their heads. Money was scarce, but creativity was abundant. They grew a garden, kept chickens, and bartered with neighbors. These experiences shaped his understanding of what it meant to value every resource and avoid waste. When World War II broke out, he enlisted, leaving the family farm to serve overseas. He returned with a worldview broadened by his travels and a determination to own his own land. He worked in a factory for years, saving every paycheck. He bought used equipment and leased land until he could afford a small farm of his own. He married Earl's mother, and together they labored from dawn until after dark. They made do without modern conveniences. Water was pumped by hand. Light came from kerosene lamps until they could afford electricity. The day Earl's father purchased the land that would become the family farm is etched in Earl's memory, even though he was just a child. His father returned from town with papers and a look of awe. He did not make a speech. Instead, he hung his hat on a peg and went out to the field to plow. That night at supper, he said that the land was theirs and that it carried with it both opportunity and responsibility. Earl remembers the pride in his father's voice, but also the seriousness. Land ownership was not a guarantee of success. It was a commitment to work that land with care. It was a promise to pay back the mortgage and to leave the soil in better condition than they found it. Earl's father taught him how to drive a tractor at a young age. Earl would sit on the metal seat as his father walked alongside, his hand guiding the steering wheel. When he was older, he worked by his father's side, loading hay bales onto wagons, picking rock and tending cattle. His father rarely praised him. When a job was done well, his father might nod and say that it was acceptable. When something was done poorly, his father simply had him do it again. Some might see this as harsh, but to Earl, it was a form of instruction. His father was teaching him that work should meet a standard, not for the sake of appearance, but for the sake of function. A fence built poorly would not keep cattle in. A plow set too deep would waste fuel and damage equipment. As Earl grew into adulthood, he began to understand the depth of his father's wisdom. His father practiced crop rotation long before it became widely recommended. He planted strips of grass along slopes to reduce erosion. He built relationships with neighbors based on mutual aid rather than competition. He believed that if one farmer failed, the community suffered. He kept careful records of rainfall, yields, and expenses, not to brag, but to learn. Earl found these old journals years later and was struck by the level of detail. Each entry was written in neat handwriting, documenting successes and failures with equal weight. These journals became a treasure trove of knowledge. They guided Earl through his first years of managing the farm. They reminded him of his father's disciplined approach. Earl's father also had a softer side that he rarely showed in public. He loved music. On Saturday nights, he would pull out a fiddle and play old tunes by ear. Earl and his siblings would dance on the wooden floor of the living room, their laughter mingling with the music. Their mother would join in, her bare feet tapping. In those moments, the worries of weather and markets faded. The family found joy in simple pleasures. Earl's father also valued education. Though he had only an 8th grade education, he encouraged his children to pursue learning. He read books borrowed from the library in town and discussed them over supper. He wanted his children to have opportunities he had not had. When Earl decided to continue farming rather than pursue a trade in town, his father supported him without hesitation, but he made Earl promise to keep learning. In his later years, Earl's father slowed down physically but never mentally. He still rose early, walking out to the barns with his cane. He would lean on the fence and watch the cattle, offering advice or criticism. He would sit in the shade of the big oak tree near the house, whittling small pieces of wood into shapes. He told stories of his youth, of crossing the Atlantic on a ship crowded with soldiers, of seeing Paris for the first time, of returning to Iowa and feeling the ground beneath his boots and knowing he was home. When he passed away, the community came together to celebrate his life. There were stories of his generosity, loaning a tractor to a neighbor, delivering firewood to an elderly widow during a blizzard, driving a neighbor to a doctor's appointment in town when their car broke down. The church was filled with people whose lives he had touched. Earl stood in the front pew, his heart heavy but also full of gratitude. He knew that his father's legacy lived on not only in the land he had worked, but in the values he had instilled. Earl keeps his father's pocket watch in a drawer beside his bed. On difficult days, he opens the drawer and holds the watch in his hand. It is heavy and warm, smooth from years of use. It does not tick anymore, but it still measures time in a different way. It reminds Earl that he is part of a lineage of farmers who faced challenges with courage and grace. It reminds him that complaining was never part of the equation because his father and his father's father had no time for it. They reserved their energy for work, for family, and for faith. They did not use words to broadcast their struggles. They used actions to overcome them. When Earl slips the watch back into the drawer, he feels a renewed sense of purpose. He knows that his father would expect nothing less. Community is the lifeblood of rural areas. For farmers like Earl, who spend much of their time in solitude with only cattle and crops for company, gatherings are vital. They provide connection, support, and a reminder that others share similar joys and struggles. One of the most cherished events in Earl's County is the annual Harvest Festival. Held each autumn after the fields have been harvested but before winter sets in, the festival is a celebration of abundance and gratitude. The town square, usually quiet, comes alive with booths and music. Farmers bring in their best pumpkins, gourds, and ears of corn to display. Bakers lay out pies, cakes, and breads. Quilters hang colorful quilts made with patterns passed down through generations. Earl and his wife have attended this festival for decades. In the early years, they brought their children who would run from booth to booth, sticky fingers holding caramel apples. Earl would stand with other men near the tractor display discussing yields, weather patterns, and market rumors. They spoke in measured tones, sharing information but never boasting. At the pie contest, Earl's wife won several blue ribbons with her apple pie. The secret, she would say, was using lard instead of shortening, and apples picked at the right stage of ripeness. After her passing, Earl continues to bake pies for the festival in her honor. His crusts are not as perfect as hers, but his pies carry the warmth of memory. When he stands behind the booth serving slices to neighbors, he feels connected to her. The festival also includes a barn dance. A local band plays fiddle, guitar, and banjo while couples of all ages take to the floor. Earl dances with his daughters, his neighbors' wives, and occasionally with his granddaughter when she visits. Music has a way of loosening tongues. During breaks in the dancing, conversations range from humorous stories of livestock escapades to serious discussions of financial pressures. Younger farmers ask, older ones about managing debt and planning for retirement. Older farmers ask younger ones about new technology and marketing platforms. These exchanges are informal but invaluable. They build relationships across generations. They foster mentorship and understanding. Beyond the festival, community support manifests in daily acts. When someone falls ill, meals appear on their doorstep. When a field needs to be harvested quickly due to approaching weather, neighbors arrive with combines and wagons. When a child is raising money for a school trip, farmers reach into their wallets. These acts create a network of reciprocal care. Earl has both given and received such help. During the year of the hailstorm, his neighbors helped him replant. When his barn needed a new roof, a group of men spent a Saturday nailing shingles. When his wife was diagnosed with cancer, women from the church brought casseroles and sat with her so he could attend to chores. He remembers one winter when a neighbor's house caught fire. He drove his truck through snowdrifts at midnight with blankets and coffee. He watched as the community formed a human chain, passing buckets of water until firefighters arrived. The house could not be saved, but no one was hurt. The next day, the town gathered to plan how to help the family rebuild. These stories illustrate that men who do not complain are not islands. Their resilience is not solely individual. It is supported by a community that values mutual aid. Complaining is often a solitary act. Helping is communal. By focusing on action rather than grievances, farmers like Earl strengthen their bonds. They understand that there will be times when they will need help, and times when they will be the ones to offer it. This reciprocity is woven into the fabric of rural life. It reduces the stigma of asking for assistance because everyone is both giver and receiver at different times. It also creates a safety net that mental health professionals say is crucial in preventing crises. When people know that others care and will show up, they are more likely to reach out during dark moments. Community extends beyond immediate neighbors. Earl participates in the State Farm Bureau and attends meetings where policy and advocacy are discussed. He sits on a committee that addresses land conservation and water quality. He contributes to discussions about soil health practices and buffer strips. He listens to presentations about new legislation and how it will affect small farms. He understands that the policies made in state and federal capitals have direct impacts on his livelihood. By engaging at this level, he amplifies the voice of farmers who might otherwise be overlooked. He also volunteers at the local school, teaching students about agriculture. He brings in ears of corn and soybeans, explaining how crops grow and why cover crops matter. He hopes that even if these children never farm, they will develop an appreciation for where their food comes from and respect for those who produce it. Faith communities play a significant role in rural areas as well. Earl's church is a simple white building with a steeple. On Sundays, he sits in a pew he has occupied since childhood. The sermons speak about love, responsibility, and forgiveness. The hymns are familiar. When the congregation sings in unison, Earl feels the voices fill the space with warmth. The church is not only a place of worship, but also a center for social support. After services, people gather for coffee and conversation. They organize care teams for those who are sick. They raise money for families facing medical bills. They host potlucks where tables sag under the weight of casseroles, salads, and desserts. During the height of the farm crisis, the church held prayer meetings for farmers at risk of losing their land. People cried openly, and others placed hands on their shoulders. It was a rare break from the stoicism that typically characterizes men. In the community, this ability to express vulnerability in a trusted space is part of what allows men who do not complain publicly to process their emotions in private. Mental health in agriculture deserves deeper examination than a passing mention. Farmers face stressors that are both acute and chronic. Weather disasters such as floods and droughts can wipe out crops in a matter of hours. Market crashes can turn projected profits into losses overnight. Long-term challenges like soil degradation, increasing input costs, and declining rural populations add layers of difficulty. The expectation that farmers should be able to handle everything without complaint compounds these pressures. Many farmers internalize stress, believing that expressing fear or sadness is a sign of weakness. This cultural norm contributes to the high suicide rates among farmers. Organizations and researchers have been working to address this issue. According to reports from rural health associations, farmers are several times more likely to die by suicide than the general population. The reasons are complex and include financial stress, isolation, access to lethal means, and stigma around seeking help. Earl has seen these factors play out in his own community. He remembers a farmer who took his life after receiving a foreclosure notice. He was a man Earl had known since childhood, a man who had helped build the community center and coached Little League. At his funeral, people whispered that they had no idea he was struggling. In the months that followed, the church organized a series of discussions about mental health. They invited professionals to speak about signs of depression and anxiety. They encouraged people to check in on their neighbors, not just about crops, but about well-being. State agencies have created hotlines specifically for farmers. These hotlines are staffed by people who understand agricultural life. They know that telling a farmer to take a vacation is often impractical. Instead, they offer practical coping strategies, financial advice, and referrals to counseling. Earl called one of these hotlines for a neighbor who was too proud to do it himself. He spoke with a counselor who provided guidance on managing debt and dealing with stress. He realized that the call did not solve everything, but it offered a lifeline. The neighbor later told him that the conversation had helped him feel less alone. This experience made Earl more vocal about mental health resources. He began sharing hotline numbers at Farm Bureau meetings and posting them at the local co-op. Telehealth has also become a valuable tool. Farmers can speak with counselors from the privacy of their tractor cab or barn. This reduces stigma because nobody sees their vehicle parked at a clinic. One of Earl's neighbors, a cattle farmer, uses telehealth sessions to cope with the loss of his wife. He told Earl that being able to talk to someone without leaving the farm made it possible for him to seek help. Earl shares these stories to encourage others. He knows that not everyone will pick up the phone, but he hopes to normalize the idea that seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness. Farm organizations have responded to these challenges by incorporating mental health education into their programs. Extension offices offer workshops on stress management. Farm credit agencies provide financial planning assistance to reduce anxiety around debt. Rural churches host support groups. Schools teach children about mindfulness and emotional intelligence. These initiatives help create a culture where farmers can express their struggles without fear of judgment. Despite these advances, there is still work to be done. Many farmers remain reluctant to talk about mental health. The image of the strong, silent farmer is deeply ingrained. Earl believes that one way to change this is through storytelling. Sharing narratives like his own and those of his neighbors helps break down the myth that real men do not feel pain. It shows that resilience and vulnerability can coexist. In his volunteer work, he encourages older farmers to tell younger ones about times when they felt overwhelmed. He urges young farmers to ask for advice not just on yields, but on coping with stress. Through these conversations, he has seen men relax their shoulders, laugh with relief, and open up about their fears. Earl also sees a role for policy in supporting mental health. He advocates for better insurance coverage for counseling services and for funding for rural mental health clinics. He writes letters to legislators, explaining that a healthy agricultural sector depends not only on crop yields, but on the mental well-being of those who produce food. He believes that if policymakers spent a week living on a farm, experiencing the unpredictability, the solitude, the physical labor, and the joy of watching crops grow, they would better understand the need for support. Ultimately, the conversation about mental health returns to the core theme of this story: men who do not complain. Earl does not advocate for constant airing of grievances. He does not encourage self-pity. He encourages honest acknowledgement of emotions and proactive seeking of help. He believes that complaining and expressing emotion are different. Complaining is venting without seeking solutions. Expression is naming what you feel so you can address it. In his view, men who do not complain are not those who never speak of hardship. They are those who choose to speak about it constructively, seeking ways to heal rather than simply to vent. Modern challenges extend beyond mental health and climate. Economic pressures have intensified as farms consolidate and rural populations decline. Corporate farms with economies of scale can withstand price fluctuations better than small family operations. Young people often leave rural areas for urban opportunities, leading to aging communities. Schools consolidate and close. Hospitals struggle to stay open. These trends create a feedback loop. The fewer services a community has, the less attractive it becomes for young families. Earl has seen this cycle firsthand. The school his children attended closed 10 years ago. Students now travel miles by bus to attend class in another town. The doctor who once served the community retired and was not replaced. Earl worries about what will happen when he and farmers like him can no longer work. Technology offers both promise and challenge. Precision agriculture tools allow farmers to apply fertilizer and pesticides more efficiently, saving money and reducing environmental impact. Drones can scout fields for pests. Apps can monitor grain bin temperatures. Earl has adopted some of these tools, but he is also cautious. He knows that technology is expensive and that the returns do not always justify the cost. He also knows that reliance on data can create a false sense of control. He uses technology as a tool, not a crutch. He still walks his fields, digs in the soil, and trusts his instincts. He teaches younger farmers to strike a balance. Embrace innovation when it adds value, but do not forget the fundamentals of agronomy and animal husbandry. Another modern challenge is the global nature of agricultural markets. A drought in South America or a trade dispute between superpowers can cause price swings that ripple through Iowa. Earl remembers when a trade war with China led to steep tariffs on soybeans, one of his primary crops. Prices dropped sharply. He watched his projected revenue shrink in a matter of weeks. Response: he diversified further, planting oats and rye for cover and for sale, and exploring direct marketing of beef to local consumers. He read about policy proposals and called his representatives to voice his concerns. He attended meetings with other farmers to discuss strategies. He did not complain. He acted. Climate change is perhaps the most unpredictable challenge. Scientists warn that the Midwest will experience more intense rain events and longer periods of drought. Earl has already observed these shifts. He recalls years where rain delayed planting into June and years where heat waves scorched corn during pollination. He adapts by changing planting dates, experimenting with drought-tolerant varieties, and installing drainage tile in fields prone to flooding. He attends workshops on regenerative agriculture, learning about cover crops, crop rotations, and grazing systems that build soil organic matter. These practices help the land retain moisture during drought and absorb water during heavy rains. They also sequester carbon, contributing to the fight against climate change. Earl understands that adaptation is not optional. It is a necessity. Men who do not complain accept reality and adjust. They do not waste time wishing for the climate of the past. They look ahead and prepare. Cultural perceptions of farming also present a challenge. Many urban residents have little connection to agriculture. They may not understand the complexities of food production or the pressures farmers face. They might blame farmers for environmental issues without recognizing the strides many have made in conservation. Earl is patient with misunderstandings. When a friend from the city questioned why he applies fertilizer, he explained the science behind nutrient management. He invited her to visit the farm. He showed her the soil tests, the buffer strips along streams, the pollinator habitat he has planted. He believes that bridging this gap is critical. A society that values farmers will support policies that help them thrive. A society that does not understand farming may inadvertently harm it. Despite these modern pressures, Earl remains optimistic. He sees innovation in younger farmers who are adopting regenerative practices, integrating livestock and cropping systems, using mobile apps to connect directly with consumers, and exploring niche markets. He sees resilience in communities that are repurposing closed schools into community centers or small business incubators. He sees hope in policies that fund rural broadband and conservation. He also sees a growing appreciation for local food and sustainable practices among consumers. He believes that if farmers and consumers work together, they can create a more just and resilient food system. Earl's optimism does not blind him to reality. He knows that many farms will continue to struggle. He knows that not all will survive. He knows that some children will leave and not return. He knows that climate change will bring more unexpected challenges, but he chooses to focus on what he can influence. He chooses to mentor younger farmers, to support local businesses, to vote for policies that align with his values, and to implement practices that build soil health. He chooses to be part of solutions. This is the essence of men who do not complain. They are pragmatists and idealists. They believe in the power of collective action and individual responsibility. They understand that complaining might momentarily ease frustration, but it does not plant a seed or repair a barn. Action does. Reflection brings clarity. As Earl sits in his living room on a crisp autumn evening with the harvest complete and the grain bins full, he reflects on the decades he has spent tending soil, caring for animals, and nurturing a family. The room is filled with relics of a lifetime: a faded wedding photo on the mantel, a quilt his wife made draped over a chair, shelves of worn books on agriculture and theology, a pair of work boots by the door. The quiet is punctuated by the ticking of a clock and the occasional creak of the house settling. In these moments of stillness, the events of his life play through his mind like scenes in a movie. He recalls the joy of seeing sprouts break through the soil for the first time. He remembers the terror of watching a tornado skirt the edge of his property. He feels the pride of hearing his daughter deliver a speech at her college graduation. He feels the grief of burying his father. He also considers the concept of men who do not complain. He thinks about his father, who rarely expressed frustration even when carrying heavy burdens. He thinks about his neighbors, who gathered to help each other without expecting recognition. He thinks about himself and wonders whether his own reluctance to complain has been beneficial or detrimental. On the one hand, it has allowed him to push through hardships, to focus on solutions, and to model resilience. On the other hand, it may have prevented him from seeking help sooner during moments of profound stress. He concludes that the key is balance. Silence can be noble, but only if it does not isolate or cause harm. Speaking up can be liberating, especially when done with the intention of seeking support or effecting change. Earl notes the generational shift taking place. Younger farmers are more willing to talk about mental health, to attend workshops on stress management, to form cooperatives that share resources. They use social media to connect, sharing tips on cover crops and side hustles. They are also more vocal about policy. They organize and lobby for fair trade agreements, for rural infrastructure, and for environmental stewardship. He admires their willingness to speak up and sees it as a compliment to the quiet strength of his generation. Together, these approaches can create a farming community that is both resilient and adaptable. In his reflection, he acknowledges the role of storytelling. Stories like his own help bridge generations and communities. They reveal the human side of agriculture beyond the statistics of yield and profit. They convey values that cannot be measured in bushels. Stories allow farmers to process their experiences and allow listeners to empathize. Earl recalls nights spent at the kitchen table listening to his father's stories. He remembers feeling connected to something larger than himself. Now he tells his own stories to his grandchildren and to young farmers. He hopes that by sharing, he helps them avoid pitfalls and find comfort in knowing they are not alone. As he finishes reflecting, he stands and goes to the window. Outside, the moon casts a soft light over the fields. The stubble from harvested corn glows silver. He opens the window slightly and lets the cool air fill the room. The smell of earth and leaves drifts in. He feels a deep peace. He knows that tomorrow there will be work to do, equipment to clean, bills to pay, decisions to make. He also knows that he will approach each task with the same steady determination that has defined his life. He will not complain when problems arise. He will seek solutions and lean on his community. He will honor the legacy of his father and the countless farmers who came before. He will adapt to modern challenges while holding on to timeless values. As this story closes, consider the lessons embedded in Earl's life. Hard work and resilience are essential, but so is community. Silence can be powerful, but so can asking for help. Tradition provides roots, but innovation allows growth. If you find yourself facing challenges, remember the men and women who toil in fields, through storms and droughts, without complaint, not because they do not feel pain, but because they choose to channel their energy into action. Reflect on your own experiences. Share a story of perseverance or a time when a neighbor's support made a difference. Join our community of listeners and readers who believe in the dignity of labor and the power of quiet strength. Subscribe to The Last Farmer for more narratives that honor those who feed the nation. Together, we can ensure that the legacy of men who do not complain continues to inspire future generations. The narrative of men who do not complain extends beyond any single individual or era. It continues to evolve through younger generations who are inheriting not only land, but also the weight of expectations and the possibility of transformation. In this chapter, we explore the story of Clara and Jacob, a young couple in their 30s who moved back to Iowa after working in corporate jobs in the city. They represent a new wave of farmers, people who bring fresh ideas and modern technology to the fields while seeking to honor the principles embodied by elders like Earl. They are not immune to the pressures of modern life or the allure of convenience, but they have chosen a path that demands resilience and intention. Clara studied environmental science in college and worked for a decade at a non-profit that focused on water quality in urban areas. Her work made her passionate about soil conservation and regenerative practices. Jacob, an engineer, spent years in a company that designed renewable energy systems. They met at a conference on sustainability and discovered a shared interest in food systems. They married and lived in a small apartment overlooking a bustling street. On weekends, they visited farmers' markets and joined a community-supported agriculture program. They began dreaming about having their own farm where they could grow vegetables, raise animals humanely, and educate others about sustainable living. The dream seemed distant until Clara's grandparents decided to retire from farming. The grandparents had no heirs willing to take over. Clara and Jacob saw an opportunity and a challenge. They discussed the decision for months, weighing the risks of leaving stable jobs against the pull of the land. They visited Earl to seek advice. Earl listened as they described their vision. He saw their enthusiasm and fear. He told them about the hailstorm of 1978, the farm crisis of the 80s, and the quiet satisfaction of watching seeds germinate. He did not tell them what to do. He simply shared his experience and reminded them that farming was as much about community as it was about crops. Clara and Jacob decided to buy the farm from her grandparents and rename it Wild Oak Farm in honor of the large oak tree that stood at the edge of the property. They invested their savings, secured a loan, and moved into the farmhouse. They renovated it with help from friends, painting walls, fixing the roof, and installing a solar array. They cleared out old machinery and turned part of the barn into a packing shed. They built raised beds for vegetables, planted fruit trees, and installed a high tunnel for season extension. They purchased a small herd of heritage pigs and a flock of laying hens. Their plan was to raise diverse products, sell directly to consumers, and practice regenerative agriculture. The first year tested them. The weather was erratic. Heavy spring rains delayed planting. When they finally got seeds in the ground, a late frost damaged seedlings. Deer ate lettuce, raccoons raided the chicken coop, and the irrigation pump failed during a heat wave. Clara and Jacob found themselves working 14-hour days, their hands blistered and backs sore. They argued over planting schedules and finances. At one point, exhausted and frustrated, Clara broke down in tears in the field. She felt as if they had made a mistake. Jacob held her hand and reminded her that they were learning. They sat on overturned buckets, dirt caked on their clothes, and made a list of what had gone wrong and what they could improve. They decided to install better fencing, invest in frost blankets, and join a local farmers' market to diversify income. They reached out to Earl again. He came over one afternoon, walked through their fields, and offered practical advice. He suggested planting cover crops to suppress weeds and build soil. He showed them how to repair their pump with spare parts instead of buying a new one. He talked about resilience not as an abstract concept, but as a series of deliberate choices. Slowly, their farm began to thrive. They learned the rhythms of the land. They realized that complaining did not solve problems. When a raccoon got into the chicken coop again, Jacob set about reinforcing the wire mesh rather than cursing his luck. When a customer at the market complained about the price of their organic tomatoes, Clara calmly explained the labor involved and the benefits of chemical-free produce. She also listened to the customer's concerns and offered a smaller size box at a lower price. Their approach to challenges mirrored Earl's philosophy. Acknowledge the issue, seek a solution, learn from it, and move on. They also learned to celebrate small victories. The first time they harvested a basket of ripe strawberries without pest damage, they danced in the field. When their pigs farrowed successfully and produced healthy piglets, they invited neighbors to see. These moments provided encouragement. Community became integral to Wild Oak Farm's success. Clara and Jacob joined a network of young farmers who met monthly to share knowledge. They formed a cooperative to purchase seeds and feed in bulk, reducing costs. They created an online platform where members could advertise surplus produce and equipment. They organized skill shares where one farmer would teach carpentry while another taught soil testing. This collaborative approach allowed them to overcome the isolation that often plagues farmers. It also fostered friendship and accountability. When someone felt overwhelmed, others offered help. When a member's greenhouse collapsed under snow, the group showed up with tools and rebuilt it in a weekend. Through these interactions, Clara and Jacob realized that men and women who do not complain are often those who rely on and contribute to a supportive network. Education was a pillar of Wild Oak Farm's mission. Clara hosted workshops on composting, cover cropping, and pollinator habitats. She invited school groups to visit, teaching children about the life cycle of vegetables and the importance of soil health. Jacob offered tours of their solar array and explained how it powered their irrigation and refrigeration systems. They wrote a newsletter that described challenges and solutions on the farm. In doing so, they demystified agriculture for urban consumers and cultivated a loyal customer base. People appreciated the transparency. They understood why a salad mix might cost more at the farmer's market than at a supermarket. They felt connected to the land through stories of drought, rain, pests, and harvest. As the farm stabilized, Clara and Jacob started thinking about legacy. They wanted to ensure that their practices would continue to regenerate the land, even if their own children chose different careers. They began documenting everything they did: soil test results, planting calendars, grazing rotations. They created a binder filled with notes, charts, and maps. They also established a conservation easement to protect part of the land from development. They planted a prairie strip along a stream to filter runoff and provide habitat for birds and beneficial insects. They installed contour strips on slopes to prevent erosion. They kept bees to pollinate crops and support biodiversity. These choices reflected a commitment to stewardship. In their personal lives, Clara and Jacob navigated the balance between resilience and vulnerability. They recognized that not complaining did not mean suppressing emotions. They scheduled weekly check-ins with each other to talk about stress, successes, and fears. They sought counseling during a particularly difficult period when an illness in Jacob's family required travel and time away from the farm. They shared their struggles with their farmer network, receiving empathy and advice. They used meditation and journaling to process feelings. They discovered that Acknowledging emotions allowed them to move forward more effectively than ignoring them. This approach differed from the stoicism of previous generations, but it aligned with the essence of resilience, facing reality and taking action. As time passed, Earl and Clara and Jacob developed a close friendship. Earl enjoyed their company and the way they approached farming. They respected his experience and sought his counsel. He respected their innovation and learned from them as well. They often sat at his kitchen table, sharing meals and stories. They compared yield data from cover-cropped fields with those without. They discussed the challenges of marketing directly to consumers. Earl told them about the first time he used a computer to sell grain contracts. Clara laughed at his description of the dial-up modem and the screeching sound it made. Jacob showed him an app that tracked soil moisture in real time. Earl marveled at the data available and at the ability to monitor fields without leaving the house. He also cautioned them not to rely solely on technology. He told them about the year his radio broke during harvest, and he had to drive into town to use a payphone because he could not communicate with truck drivers. He encouraged them to maintain basic skills that would serve them if technology failed. One summer evening, Earl invited Clara and Jacob to the county fair. He wanted them to experience the tradition he cherished. They agreed and spent a day setting up a booth to sell their produce. Earl walked them around, introducing them to people he had known for decades. He pointed out the tractor he had used as a young man, now restored and shining. He told stories of past fairs. The time a cow escaped the show ring and ran down Main Street, the year a storm cut power and farmers used truck headlights to finish the livestock judging. Clara and Jacob laughed, appreciating the humor and the sense of community. As the band played and people danced, they felt connected to generations of farmers who had come before. They realized that while they were modernizing practices and using new tools, they were part of an enduring culture that celebrated hard work and harvest. The evolution of Wild Oak Farm mirrored the broader evolution of farming. It demonstrated that resilience does not mean clinging to outdated methods. It means adapting while staying grounded in principles. Clara and Jacob implemented regenerative practices because they made ecological and economic sense. They diversified income streams because relying on a single crop was risky. They invested in community because they recognized that success was collective. They embraced technology where it helped and discarded it when it did not. They celebrated heritage while forging new paths. Clara and Jacob also became advocates beyond their farm. They testified at state hearings about the importance of funding soil conservation and mental health services. They wrote opinion pieces for local newspapers explaining how policy decisions impacted small farms. They collaborated with universities on research projects, providing data from their fields to scientists studying soil carbon sequestration. They mentored interns from urban backgrounds, opening doors for people who had never set foot on a farm. They sought to influence not just their local community, but also the systems that shape agriculture. Through their actions, Clara and Jacob demonstrated that complaining is not a necessary response to difficulty. Instead, they modeled how to turn frustration into advocacy, how to turn setbacks into lessons, how to turn isolation into community building. They were part of a generation that admired the stoicism of their elders, but recognized the need for open dialogue. They practiced transparency with their customers, their peers, and themselves. They embraced the notion that asking for help is an act of strength, not weakness. They carried on the legacy of men like Earl, women like Earl's wife, and countless others who built and sustained the heartland. They also added their own chapter, showing how agriculture can be both rooted in tradition and innovative. As we conclude this chapter and this entire story, reflect on how the narrative of men who do not complain resonates with contemporary life. In a world filled with noise and instant gratification, the discipline to focus on what truly matters is rare. Men and women on farms across the country wake before dawn, work under the open sky, and return home after dark. They face uncertainties that cannot be predicted by algorithms. They make decisions that impact not only their families, but also the broader community. They care for animals, steward soil, and feed a nation. They do so without expecting applause because the work itself is its own reward. Yet their stories deserve to be told. By listening and sharing, we honor their contributions. Think about the lessons you can apply to your own life. When faced with a challenge, do you spend more energy complaining or seeking solutions? When you see a neighbor struggling, do you offer help or assume someone else will? When you enjoy a meal, do you consider the hands that grew the food? These questions are not meant to create guilt, but to inspire reflection. The world needs people who act, who support, who build. The world needs individuals who draw strength from community and who offer strength in return. If you have found value in this story of Earl, Clara, and Jacob, and the broader community of resilient farmers, consider sharing your own experiences in the comments below. Describe a time when you faced a challenge and chose action over complaint. Share how someone's quiet strength inspired you. By contributing your voice, you become part of a network that supports and uplifts. If you want to continue exploring stories that celebrate the backbone of America, the people who work the land and feed the nation, subscribe to Zethafaipua, Last Farmer. Together we can build a community that honors tradition, embraces innovation, and cultivates hope.